Welcome back to the Goku Report, and welcome back for a new movie review. And this is not just any movie review. This is the review for the original Guardians of the Galaxy, my personal favorite MCU film, by far. So I figured it's time off and on to look back at some of the best MCU movies, in my personal opinion. A lot of mostly not so good stuff that's been coming out in the past 2 years. So with that said, first, yes, we will be doing best, in my opinion, first. The original Guardians of the Galaxy, as part of course, at the time, Phase 2, as it was known as. Original Guardians of the Galaxy, as we know, it starts, and yes, there will be spoilers ahead, just a heads up. But we start in the beginning with Peter Quill as a young boy brought in to his mother's room at the hospital where she's about ready to pass away. Innocent young boy, of course, she ends up passing away. He runs out of the hospital and ends up abducted by aliens. And then we see like the MCU Marvel logo, and we skip many years to the future, and we see now he's full grown and now played by, of course, Chris Pratt, and is investigating as he has become a Ravager. Basically space outlaws, more or less, slash pirates of sorts. And he investigates ancient ruins of a civilization on another planet, uses a special holographic projection device. Anyways, decides to look into it, and turns on music on his Walkman that he still has. How he managed to keep that going, hard to say after that many years, but of course then we have the music, and that's one of the big stars of especially the first Guardians of the Galaxy film, is the soundtrack. This soundtrack is on a whole nother level, especially when you have great classic songs from artists like David Bowie. Also, you have great songs like Cherry Bomb, or great songs like, all the different stuff. The Pina Colada song. Also, I personally am a huge fan of the cover version used in this movie of Hooked on a Feeling, of course, by Blue Suede. You also have great songs like Spear in the Sky. The soundtrack is just incredible, and like the last few songs in the movie, Ain't No Mountain High Enough, or how about the Jackson 5? Good music. But with that said, anyways, he starts dancing to it. He grabs like a batch of little creatures about ready to jump and attack him. He grabs one and pulls them and stuff and acts like they're a microphone and stuff. It's genuinely hilarious watching him dancing and stuff and everything right in the middle of ancient ruins. He ends up, though, finding the room and stuff where there's a protected orb. And then we also see technically actual, I guess you could say henchmen of course, the main antagonist of the film, Ronin the Accuser. But Ronin, now, I will say one thing is, a lot of people bash and say Ronin is not a good villain. He's too one-dimensional, or he just doesn't act right for a villain. Well, first of all, if you even knew anything about the Guardians of the Galaxy comic books, critics, you would know that's the way Ronin is. He is supposed to take everything literal. He's pretty much the same way as Drax. Like, as Rocket said about Drax, metaphors will go over his head. And it's the same way with Ronin the Accuser. He's just very much dedicated to his insane beliefs and stuff. Basically, he wants to do. Obviously, he's like a. Well, let's say he's kind of course, a racist against people of other beliefs or other planets, races, empires. He's against basically anyone he considers is not part of his people. And he is viewed very much as a hero to his own people, except maybe the government. But with that said, you also have many other things happen, but Peter ends up surviving. He gets away from the henchman, gets on, and he ends up finally escaping in his ship, which he forgets that he had a girlfriend sleeping in the ship at the time and stuff, and he's like, honestly, I completely forgot you were even here. Needless to say, I'm sure that did not go over the best, but also somehow he has a cassette player and stuff he got built into his spaceship, which, by the way, is called the Milano. Of course, reference to Alyssa Milano, which, of course, was obviously in the 80s, a pretty big upcoming young star in the show Who's the Boss, starring Tony Danza. One of my personal favorite 80s sitcoms. But, nevertheless, it's awesome seeing all these cool references, and everything's very much loyal to the actual comic. James Gunn killed it, honestly, with this film overall, in my opinion. Also, again, to see the official introduction in the ship and stuff to Ronin, and we see also with Ronin on the ship, obviously Nebula, and also Gamora. Of course, the adopted daughters of the Mad Titan Thanos. The overarching evil, or villain, if you will. Though, he's definitely a very interesting, complex villain. We only get to see a small amount of him in the film, but I loved watching him just sitting in his floating throne chair. It's really cool. And how he basically completely intimidates Ronin is something else. And then you'll have a little henchman talking back at him and stuff, representative of Thanos, and I swear, when he talks and stuff, he sounds so much like freaking Palpatine from Star Wars. It's crazy. He has the same Palpatine voice and everything. But really interesting. Ronin ends up using like a force blast or something out of his hammer and snaps the neck of that, representative of Thanos. But he makes it quite clear, if you don't get me the orb, because end up finding out, of course, there's a stone in the orb. Obviously, the Stone of Power. But yes, we also see Gamora get sent to go after him. We get finally introduced to the main planet, of course, which beautiful, lush style, like futuristic planet that honestly reminds me a lot of like the main planet you're on in the video game Phantasy Star Universe, which is fascinating because seriously, the model like design of the city and stuff reminds me so much of the Phantasy Star Universe. It's crazy. But we also see the introduction to, of course, Groot and Rocket. Of course, voiced by... Bradley Cooper. But it's actually interesting, and I love, honestly, Rock is one of my favorite things about the film. The whole relationship between Rock and Groot is hilarious. We see him looking around at different humans and stuff with his special, like, zoom in and stuff, and we see then our quick little, at the time, Stan Lee cameo. Rest in peace, Stan Lee. And he finally locks on, finds Star-Lord, now as Peter Quill goes by the nickname of Star-Lord. Trying to go and sell everything, and when the dealer and stuff that was supposed to buy the orb ends up finding out that Ronin's men went after him and stuff, and he's like, Ronin, if Ronin's involved in this, I want no part of this transaction. Gets kicked out, and we see Gamora standing there outside the door, and stuff ends up trying to obviously steal the orb from Star-Lord, and ensues a bunch of craziness back and forth, and then Rocket and Groot get involved also, and tells Groot to bag like the human stuff, and Groot ends up bagging instead Gamora, and Rocket is like, wrong genders, man. But it's hilarious, all the inner stuff, and with, of course, Groot saying, I am Groot, but each time the way he says is supposed to be interpreted differently, of course, voiced by Vin Diesel. But this movie is just bonkers and nuts, and maybe that's why I love the film as much as I do. But we see going on, end up getting sent to space prison, and we see there that some of the others in the prison end up trying to kill, obviously, Gamora, and Star-Lord decides to try to save her life. And also we see the introduction of course, also Drax the Destroyer, played by, of course, the great former wrestler, David Batista. But, and may I add, Batista plays the role of Drax just perfectly, in all honesty. But, ends up at the end though of the argument stuff, ends up I like your knife, I'm keeping it. And then the other, bad criminal guy's like, I really like that knife. Kind of funny, honestly, just some of the interactions. And also the fact how everything is crazy in the prison and stuff. They end up breaking out. It's really funny. They were talking about idea of trying to step-by-step plan everything to get out of the prison, and Groot ends up acting on things and ends up pulling the power thing out, and they're like, Rocket's like, we'll just improvise. And they get to it, and you have they have to get the arm of a guard, or not guard, but device and stuff, and it's just funny, everything that happens. And the whole joke that Rocket makes talking about needing somebody's arm and stuff, and Peter Quill is had to direct a bunch of credits and stuff for it, which is honestly a lot of fun. And Rocket just snickers and laughs and stuff after Quill's paid him a bunch of units and stuff. But they managed to end up escaping, and luckily also Drax helps them get out, and most of them are on the Milano getting ready to escape, and Quill is like, it's not here. And talking about where did that blue put it and stuff. He ends up going back to the ship to get his Walkman with his music and stuff. And that's when you start hearing the Pina Colada song playing, which is, I think, a great choice. The timing of the music is superb with this film. But seeing him also, fly back to ship, and, Drax is sitting there waiting and sees Behold, and is, impressed with, Quill and stuff, and asks why he was, getting back and stuff. And he, hands him the Walkman and stuff, and Drax is like, you're an imbecile. And I appreciate that. Plus, they go to basically more or less a small planet inside of a former Eternals giant head that became a giant city away from laws and regulations and everything. That's when we hear music from David Bowie playing. I think great choice. You have the Collector, which was already introduced in prior film, and post-credits scene of Thor: The Dark World, which I appreciate those connections and everything. And we see in it a certain like space dog in a spacesuit and stuff. We also see at the end credits of the film, of course, big spoiler, Howard the Duck, which would appear again in the next Guardians film. But I'll be honest, I don't like the Howard the Duck movie. I don't mind this redesign of Howard. Looks much more loyal to the comics, so I'm fine with that, and doing like a CG was a better choice. But we see they end up learning more about the Stones of Power, the Infinity Stones, or the Infinity Gems, however you want to go. But it is quite interesting, and they see how much power. Unfortunately, also Drax has a vendetta against Ronin because Ronin killed his family. So he ends up telling him about where to find things. So Ronin shows up with Nebula. Chase scene ensues between Nebula and Gamora. Gamora trying to keep the stone from getting into their hands so it doesn't end up in Thanos' hands. Though, at the end, Peter Quill ends up trying to sacrifice his own life to save Gamora, and they end up getting captured by the Ravengers, of course, led by a certain other blue alien, which was more or less kind of like the Ravengers, or rather, like sort of like the guy who really raised Peter Quill, obviously, which I actually appreciate. And most of the casting in this movie was also very much spot on. Honestly, Yondu is probably one of my favorite characters in honesty, especially in the second film. That was just perfect choice, perfect casting also for Yondu. But we also get to see, towards the end of the film, him using his abilities with his arrow, which is great seeing from the comic. Though he doesn't have the really impressive Mohawk device, though they would end up showing that in the second film. More based on the actual comic book. But we end up seeing stuff that ends up when Ronin discovers that the orb had a Infinity Stone. He ends up putting the Infinity Stone in his hammer. And it's weird how kind of inconsistent things are. Holding the stone is supposed to basically wipe you out of existence, but it technically doesn't really end up killing him. But then we get towards the end of the film and everything. Luckily, they're able to convince Yondu and the Ravengers to help them stop from destroying a specific planet that they are all headed back to try to help save. Luckily, the Ravengers help stop Ronin, but they end up going after. And finally, one of the bad guys in the film, towards the end, acknowledges Peter Quill as Star-Lord, and he's like, finally. Also, we get to see, I think one of the funniest things, after the serious moments and everything in the movie, also it's interesting seeing Glenn Close in the film as well, as one of the higher-ups in the government. But they make it to the actual planet, and Ronin gets ready to wipe everything out with a hammer, and you see Star-Lord breakdancing and stuff, and it's like, dance off, me and you, bro, and stuff. And he tries to look at Gamora, and she's like, wants something part of it, and he's like, soul, take back, and stuff. And just like, Ronin's like, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm distracting you, turd muffin or whatever. I forget the exact wording he used. But it's hilarious. And then we see at point blank basically using that rocket launcher device that Rocket created, used by Drax, destroys, and then Peter grabs the stone, starts destroying him. Then all of them like hold hands and stuff, somehow able to hold on long enough to use the stone, ends up destroying Ronin. And Ronin is no more. Barely be able to end up saving, and luckily able to get back in the orb. Yondu ends up wanting the orb and stuff, and he tries to warn, but he ends up faking out Yondu Because at the end, Yantu decides out of curiosity to open the orb and sees a little troll doll. Kind of perfect because it really was like trolling. Yantu, he ends up like smirking, smiling and stuff, probably thinking that's my boy. It's funny. And overall, though, I love the film. As I said, I think the pacing is great. There's really no pacing issues. The film, it just flows so well together. It really is a perfect example. I think it is one of the best, like, space comedy action films, pure and simple ever. I love this film. I always will. I've seen this movie probably like 18 times, kid you not. So, I still love this movie, and I look forward to watching this movie many more times to come. But with that said, that is it for this review. On a scale, how do I rate this film? Easy. It gets an A+ grade for me. But with that said, leave a comment below what your thoughts are on Guardians of the Galaxy, which is your favorite MCU film, and do you agree, with the exception of maybe Universe of Madness, Doctor Strange, pretty much none of the other, like, Phase 4 films so far have been really that good quality-wise. Though, I give a lot of credit to where credit's due for the Doctor Strange film, mostly because of the great Sam Raimi. Just like the reason why this film is so superb is because of James Gunn and his humor, which I appreciate very much so. But with that said, I'll see y'all next time. Same YouTube time, same YouTube channel. Stay safe out there.